Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Curtains Up, a historical perspective on drama, the podcast where we explore theater's past, present, and future, and the role the arts play in shaping our communities. Today, I'm honored to welcome Miss Karen Hanan, a leader whose career has been dedicated to advancing the arts across Washington state and beyond. As executive director of the Washington State's Arts Commission, Ms. Hanan works at the intersection of arts education, public policy, community development, and cultural preservation. Throughout her career, she has championed the idea that the arts are not simply entertainment, but an essential part of vibrant communities. From supporting arts education programs for students to helping communities invest in creativity, Ms. Hanan has been a leading voice for arts advocacy and public engagement. Today, we'll discuss why the arts matter, the challenges facing arts organizations and educators, and the importance of advocacy and public support for the future of the arts. Ms. Hanan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. By the way, it's Karen Hanan. Always a very hard one for the American tongue
Oh,
to get
Karen
round.
Hanna.
Karen Hanan. There you go.
Karen Hanna. Okay, thank you. So
Yeah, no
sorry.
problem.
As we begin, I'd like to start with a fundamental question that often comes up in conversations about arts funding and advocacy. Many people think of the arts as something nice to have rather than something essential. They view it as entertainment rather than something that can actually change people's lives. What I wanted to ask you is, how do you define the role of the arts in a healthy community?
Well, Rohan, thank you. What a great question to open the door with. So I guess I think of the arts as not the frosting on the cake of a community, but rather the yeast. So a healthy community really does require physical health, economic stability, civic connection, and so on. And the arts, I think, feed each element of that connection. If you look at our creative district program that we have here at the State Arts Commission, this is a program that certifies areas in communities across our state as creative districts characterized by, a lot of arts and cultural activity sort of thing. So we find, though, that by investing in a town's cultural core in that way, we aren't just giving people who live there, people who visit, and so on, something nice to look at. We're also helping them build a central kind of gathering point, if you will, that can foster civic pride, bring neighbors together, and it improves overall community well-being, both economically and also on a general sort of health level. So, the arts to me are very much part of what defines a healthy community.
Absolutely. And I think what you're describing here matches what I've seen through my podcast and through what I've done through Curtains Up. One thing I do with some of my sister's friends who are in elementary school is we perform for seniors at IACS, which is the Indian American Community Services Senior Program. And what I noticed is that every time we go there and every time we talk to them, every time we perform to them, they like open up, right? Like the first time we went there and the first time I went to a senior center, seeing this, they were very closed off. Like it was something new to them. It was the first time they'd seen something like this at a senior program. So they weren't used to it. But as we performed, the more and more we performed for them, the more I saw them open up, right? And after the play, after the full like 30-minute play, it was a short play because I wrote and directed it. But after the play was done, everybody was like laughing. Everybody was just so happy. It's just like 30 minutes of just watching these kids perform and try their best. It made them so unbelievably happy. Didn't just like the connections in that room were so strong. So I think I completely agree with what you're saying there about how community is needs art, right? Like through it, like its art is not the frosting of the cake, but rather it is kind of what makes the cake in the first place, right? It is one of the essential ingredients.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So I think the arts are being recognized more and more, though, as part of actual health and well-being. So what you're describing is joy. And, if you're feeling joyful and happy, you tend to be in better health and you're certainly in better community or in connection with your neighbors. One of our programs here at the agency, another one is our Wellness Arts in the Military program, which is also known as WAM. And this allows us to work with military connected individuals and their families across the state. And the idea is that by bringing the arts into, say, for example, a transition process where somebody is transitioning out of the military and back into community, if they can participate in a choir, a music group, some drama, be part of the local theatre, the community theatre, whatever it might be, that provides an easy, soft, and joyful entry back into community. It's pretty non-threatening, it's creative, there's not really a downside to it. So we find that our work, especially around individuals with stress, PTSD, and so on. The arts, not just with military connected populations, but with everybody in general, can be extremely effective. And one more thing I'll add is that we have just now signed a contract to bring social arts prescribing into the state. And, that's a really exciting sort of step forward for our state. We have quite a lot of partners in this. But the end idea would be that your doctor or prescriber could prescribe you a dose of arts, maybe because you're presenting with loneliness, which we know is an epidemic in our country, or, stress, or maybe, you can be presented with a dose of dance, for example, because you need to get more mobile. But all of those things, not only do they help you physically, but they also get you back in community because you go to the dance studio, you go to the watercolor
You have to
studio,
engage with the
and
community, and it
you have to
helps.
engage.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've actually heard about WOM. It actually matches well with what I've talked about with a previous podcast guest. And it was basically about creative aging. With Professor Jennifer Kulik, she talked about silver type and talked specifically about how creative aging is a process where we can stop the effects that loneliness has on elderly people or seniors and help them. They keep their brains engaged, and it's actually shown scientific effects where seniors who engage with arts typically have less risk of Alzheimer's, less risk of dementia, and other effects. And I feel like specifically for military, right, with PTSD being a super, super major effect that many soldiers have, I feel like arts is one of the best ways to combat that. Because while PTSD will never go away, there will always be a part of them that never leaves the battlefield. It'll at least help them understand that they aren't there anymore, and it'll take their mind off of it, at least for a little bit. So I think that's just my viewpoint on it, but I do think that WAM is a really good program.
Well, thank you, Rohan. And the data backs up your assertion. Whether it's data from the World Health Organization or the Aspen Institute or Johns Hopkins, there is a huge amount of data that shows that this works. And in terms of the military, Walter Reed is one of the biggest proponents of arts therapy as part of one of the healing modalities. And we know it works. We know it works because the data tells us that. So, we're excited to be part of that conversation and part of offering services like that to the military, but also to our aging populations and to many others.
Exactly. And we've been talking about how arts can help actually help boost the mental side of things and how it can help boost community well-being. But what I wanted to mention is how what do you think? How can arts investments strengthen both community well-being and economic development at the same time? Because we know that arts has an effect on both, but I wanted to hear your opinion on how it helps economic development as well.
Again, thank you. I think when people think of the engine that drives Washington State, they might think of things like aerospace and software or agriculture and so on. But, if you look at the federal data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, our state's creative sector, that's its creative economy, is a structural titan. It's huge. It generates $79 billion in economic value annually. That's billion with a B. And that's almost 10% 5% of Washington State's GDP. So that is the highest percentage share of any state in the nation. So, the jobs that are created also, we have about 190,000 jobs that are in the creative sector in our state, and that's roughly 5% of Washington's workforce. So, to put that in perspective, our creative workforce is more people across the state than industries like construction can claim, or agriculture for that matter. And then I think one last thing is we don't really question spending tax dollars on roads or bridges or, say, water lines because they physically connect us. But the arts are our social infrastructure, if you will, and they keep communities anchored and livable and vibrant. And without these sort of cultural anchors, I think towns can often become bedroom communities instead of vibrant, economically diverse hubs where people actually want to build businesses and raise their families.
Absolutely. And I'd say they both have a sort of like effect on each other, right? Like it's like positive reinforcement where if one is developed, it'll help develop the other, which will help develop the other, and it'll keep on going back and forth. And this is actually relates to a conversation I had with Mr. Michael Greer from Arts Fund, which is a previous episode, where we had the chance to talk about his the Arts Fund livability impact study, and it found that in Washington communities, they have a higher arts density with 33% more volunteers, 7% higher voter participation, and 3% lower income inequality, which is what you were talking about with how this sector in Washington, or the arts sector, is one of the biggest contributors. And along with that, the Arts AEP6 study found that nonprofit arts organizations nationally generate $151.7 billion in economic activity and support 2.6 million jobs. So the evidence for both returns is there. They both interact with each other a lot, and the GDP that arts provides to the Washington's arts sector is quite a lot. So I feel like there is a bit of a disconnect here that I would like to talk about with you, where in schools and in popular media specifically, right? We know that the data shows that arts plays such a big role in our community, in Washington sector, contributing to our GDP, and so many more things. Yet arts is still looked down upon. In most schools, even mine, if you look at arts, right, a lot of people do not think arts is important. They think arts is an essential. They think arts isn't like can be gotten rid of in exchange for other credits. Like, and this is happening in Washington right now. You like Washington is considering to reduce the amount of arts credits required to graduate. So I wanted your thoughts on that. What do you think caused that disconnect? Why do you think people don't understand the impacts of arts when all the data is there?
Yeah, I think a lot of the data is not known to the general population, number one. But I think, to me, arts education should very much be part of a well-rounded education. And, by in the law, it actually is part of a well-rounded education. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, there's a lot of local control to our schools and so on. And so things like the arts, when there's a budget pinch, often get removed.
That's
But
true.
to me, I think also the arts teach what people sometimes think of as kind of soft skills, but they're actually the hardest skills sometimes to automate. So, for example, theatre, as you know, teaches empathy, collaboration, public speaking, agility. How do you pivot when a line is dropped, for example. It also teaches emotional intelligence, and the future workforce that's here, or maybe it's the workforce that's here now, really requires creative problem solvers. And you can learn the technical mechanics of a job sometimes later, but things like theatre or arts education in general build the foundational human capacity, I think, to innovate and to work in teams, but also to create the next best video game, or to really be creating the next invention in medicine, for example. If your creative brain is engaged, you are more likely to be able to do that, even if you're not working directly in the arts field. So having an arts background is one of the most important things I think we can offer our kids. And then last but not least, I would also say the arts keep kids in school. Some kids thrive in sports, and that's great. That teaches all kinds of great skills too. But not every kid does want to do sports. So if we cut their potential for being in the music program or the dance program, they're being left behind. Not to mention that's a very sort of unequal approach to education, which should be well rounded and designed for most people to be able to get what they need, if not all people, but let's say at least the majority.
Right? And I feel like, especially with the sports you mentioned, right? Sports is a much, much more popular extracurricular that a lot of adults nowadays sign their kids up for. And and like I understand it, sports is very fun for most people, right? Sports is a very fun, engaging activity, but I don't understand the disconnect that people have where people just do not seem to understand the skills you can gain from arts in general, right? Like theater does teach some of the most important skills, which is public speaking, being able to speak in front of a crowd, along with flexibility and emotional intelligence, which you mentioned, right? Like when you get a new role, you have to fully understand what the character wants and what the character means so that you can play the character well. And these are some skills that a lot of people nowadays don't have because, especially in the office, everybody's just getting replaced by AI, right? And everybody is turning to AI in times when, which could be solved with just talking with another person. So that disconnect is a little bit concerning to me. And for our audience and anyone else who's listening, what do you think could be ways for people to help sort of stop this upcoming change and help spread the impact and effect that arts has on people and not let arts be left behind?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I wish it was an easy thing to solve. And I think we live now in an age of screens where people are often turning to screens rather than they are turning to human connection. And I think we've all seen the family in the restaurant where everybody is just staring at their phones as opposed to talking to each other. And there's such a loss when you do that. I mean, you lose, but you also don't gain the power of conversation and interacting with each other. So I think it's a very real problem. Social media taking over as it has done, and we're all aware of the dangers of social media in some ways. Don't get me wrong; there's lots of good things to it as well, but it, like everything else, it needs to be controlled and have guardrails. I think, especially for our youngest folks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Social media and AI, they need guardrails. I'm surprised they haven't been put in place yet because, especially with Claude Fable or Claude Mythos, it's very scary what can happen without regulation.
Yes, absolutely. So, I think people need to be encouraged to get back out to support their local businesses, right? And but part of that local business infrastructure is your local theatre, your local club where they're playing music. To actually get out and get back into community again. I don't know how we force people to do that. We don't force them to do it, but we can encourage them. And again, if we have something like Back to the Creative District program, which really encourages a lot of arts and creative activity in an area. We have 25 of them now around the country, around the state. But having those kinds of levels of activity and things to do and community members participating brings other community members in there. And then, so, which is great, gets them out of their houses and into community. But I also think an understanding of the creative economy and what it actually means to our state, in terms of jobs and all the rest of it, the more people understand, the more they're going to want to hang on to the potential for arts being an integral part of an education for a kid, for example. But it's a hard story to tell. I agree with you. Somehow, people are very willing to say, well, the arts, that will be nice to have, but we don't need to have it. Whereas, people are not saying, well, let's cut the math program because we have a budget cut. So, it's our job, I think, as arts people, but also as just humans, to carry that story, to tell the story, to encourage advocacy, and to stand up to be counted. Don't just sort of wring your hands and bemoan the fact, but go talk to your school board, go talk to your city council, talk to each other, bring the data and so on, but mostly just tell that story, and and complain loud and long when your kid's school decides to cut the arts program. And people do respond to that. I mean, one of the things I do a lot is I work with legislators, and I know that when we're trying to get something to happen, the more they hear from their communities, the more likely they are to respond. So they do respond. They're human too. They all have their art stories. And you have to go from when somebody says, well, I don't really participate in the arts, I'm not an artist. But then you dig a little deeper and you'll find that actually they probably do one way or the other. Maybe they're in their church choir, maybe their kids are into drama, but somewhere you'll find that connection. Or maybe, they're finding their own well being through health and well being through the arts. But we just have to tell a better story, I think.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with that statement, because one thing specifically that I wanted to bring out that you mentioned is that when people look at budget cuts, right? The problem with budget cuts, specifically for school, is that if you look at everything that school has, right? Maths, English, social studies, everything is just super important, right? And including drama. But the problem is that when budget cuts happen, a lot of people seem to view arts as the optional one that needs to get cut. Because, and I guess it hasn't happened yet, but a lot of people just still don't seem to understand the effect of arts, which is why so many people view it as an option. They don't interact with it heavily, and because they don't like they don't mainly interact with it, they don't see the effects of it. And as you said, they probably do have secondary interactions with it. They are probably part of their church choir, or their kids or someone they know is involved with the arts, and it is infecting them in some way to make them better at community, or make them better with talking. But because they do not have mainstream interactions with it, they do not interact with it every day. It's like a rare interaction, but it does happen. They don't see that arts is the reason for that change, and
Yeah,
because of that
absolutely.
interaction, that is the reason why so many people view it as an option rather than an essential. So I do think that what you're saying is perfectly correct. That it's super hard to sort of, you know, like build this um, engagement around arts, because it has been it's been hard to engage with arts for ever since the Middle Ages, and it's going to continue to be hard until drastic change happens. But I feel like if, as a society, we can understand the effects of arts and help fight for that change, it'll happen soon, right?
Yeah, I think one other thing I could add is one of our newer programs at Artswar at the agency is a tribal cultural affairs program that allows us to interact with and to partner with tribes, sovereign nations, around the support that they feel their arts and culture could benefit from, with a bit of state help, as it were. We're the only state in the country to have this at an arts commission level, and it's very very successful. We're engaging with all
That's good.
29 federally recognized tribes, but one of the things that we know is that tribes consider arts and culture just to be part and parcel of the way they are. They don't really think of it as something separate, but it's very much part of identity. Whether you're, a Salish tribe, doing beautiful story poles, or, maybe you're doing incredible kind of artwork or hammered artwork or metal work, whatever it might be. That's very much part of just what people do on a day-to-day basis: weaving, gathering grasses, making baskets, and so on. All of which fall into that kind of arts, that cultural space. But nobody's questioning whether it's good or bad. It just simply is. It's part and parcel of everyday life, just as learning to read is, or learning to do your numbers. They're there, and they should be there, and nobody would think of getting rid of them.
Exactly. And with that, I want to ask you one last thing. If you could leave students and our audience with one message about why the arts matter, what would it be? Because we've accepted that so many things are put in place and set in stone. So if there is one thing that you could tell everybody that you just want everybody to know, what would it be?
I think I would say that the arts are not a spectator sport and they're not a privilege for the few. They really are your birthright. So don't let anyone tell you that your creativity is secondary to a practical pursuit, because your imagination is the most practical tool you have to change the world. So claim it, protect it, and make sure you use it.
Absolutely. I think that is a great message to end off our conversation. As we conclude today's conversation, I want to extend my sincere thanks to Miss Karen Hanan for sharing her insights and experiences with us. It is Karen Hanan, right? Or
Karen Hanan, you got it.
Karen Hanan. So sorry. Um, Thank you. Today's discussion reminds us that the arts are much more than performances, galleries, or classrooms. They help us tell our stories, strengthen our communities, and inspire creativity. Miss Hannan's perspective highlights something especially important. The future of arts depends not only on artists and arts organizations, but also on educators, community leaders, policymakers, families, and students who recognize the value of creativity in our everyday lives. Thank you, Ms. Hannan, for joining us and for your continued leadership in supporting the arts throughout Washington State.
It has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you.